Robb Stark stood at the edge of the great hall in Riverrun, one hand clenched tight around the pommel of his sword, the other flexing with nervous tension. The chamber felt smaller than it was, made claustrophobic by the press of lords in their finery, the sworn men and restless onlookers who lined the walls. The banners of House Tully and House Stark hung side by side, Waterdancer Fish and Dire Wolf drifting listless in the still air. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph. He was the king in the north, newly declared by his bannermen. But war already weighed heavily on his shoulders. His father's head had not been cold a fortnight before the Northmen had raised him to a crown, and the taste of the realm's blood still lingered in the back of Robb's throat. He felt older than his years. Eyes that once shone with the carefree mischief of a young heir or the proud glint of a novice warrior now saw the world in new colors, shades of mourning, shades of vengeance. His mother, Lady Catelyn, was perched at the high table, her face unreadable, each line etched deeper by grief. The men around her waited for his word, for his command, as if he were still the boy they had known, but also the man they expected him to become overnight. Once he could have been content with a horse, a sword, and a promise of tomorrow. Now it was all strategy and pacts, swords unsheathed in the dark, ravens with their cold eyes, carrying pleas for fealty or threats of war. When news had arrived that Tywin Lannister was offering an alternative, an end to the war if a betrothal was forged, Robb had thought it a ruse or a cruel jest. It wasn't Lord Tywin's style to compromise unless he saw some advantage. Perhaps it was that the Lannisters had grown uneasy with the Tyrells massing in the south, the Baratheons in the Stormlands, and the Greyjoys threatening the coast. Certainly, the union Tywin proposed was unnerving, that Robb should wed Cersei Lannister, widow of King Robert Baratheon, mother to Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, and queen by all the laws of the realm until Joffrey's reign was secure. The notion was beyond unorthodox. It was almost an abomination of every vow of fealty and hostility that had been sworn since the day Ned Stark was imprisoned. To marry the woman who had schemed to arrest and execute his father? The idea had sickened Robb at first, and his lords had balked, outraged. Yet his mother had said quietly, "We must consider all paths to save the North from more bloodshed." Robb, for his part, was uncertain if it was a path he could live with, but the more he thought about it, the more it called to him. If this union ended the bloodshed, if it secured the North's autonomy or at least safeguarded the people he had sworn to protect, did he not have a duty to consider it? He remembered the promise he had made to Walder Frey for a marriage alliance, a promise he'd broken soon enough for the sake of love. He was not eager to compound that mistake with another reckless step. This time he had to think carefully. The realm was bleeding, the rivers were running red. And if for one moment he could imagine the sun shining over the north, free of Lannister scorpions, free of forced kneeling, well, he could at least listen. A hush spread across the hall as a Lannister envoy stepped forward. It was a lean man in a crimson cloak, the lion of House Lannister embroidered in gold. He seemed too slight to be a warrior, with deep-set eyes and the cautious stoop of a messenger. He approached, bowed stiffly, and produced a sealed letter. Robb didn't move. He let the guard at his side take the parchment and hand it to him. It bore Tywin's unmistakable seal, a golden lion's head pressed into red wax. He cracked it open and read. In the quiet of the hall, he could hear the faint rush of the trident outside the walls, could smell the tang of the river, and in that moment, he was no longer sure of anything. He read, reread. Tywin's words were direct. He offered Cersei's hand along with a pledge that all hostilities from the Iron Throne against the North would cease. In return, Robb would be recognized as Warden of the North under the crown, and a new alliance would be formed between Stark and Lannister. He would have to bend the knee, but there would be pardons, compensation, and the promise that the North's customs and autonomy be largely respected. It was a devil's bargain, yet a bargain all the same. Robb set the parchment aside and raised his eyes to the crowd. Their expressions varied: fear, hope, loathing, curiosity. His mother's face was still unreadable, but her lips pressed into a thin line as though bracing for an argument. The note said Tywin would send Cersei to Riverrun under armed escort if Robb agreed. Robb had to answer within 3 days or the deal was off. The messenger waited in silence. He felt the presence of Grey Wind beside him, the direwolf's hackles raised. Grey Wind sensed his anxiety and nuzzled his leg. Wordlessly, Robb passed the parchment to his mother. She read it, her eyes flickering across the page, and then she gave a single, short nod. She had expected nothing less from Tywin. She glanced at her son, waiting. And Robb, though uncertain, turned to the Lannister messenger and said, in a voice firmer than he felt, "You shall have my answer on the morrow." The envoy bowed again and withdrew. The hall erupted in murmurs. Some demanded the messenger's head for the insult. Others argued that the North should not stoop to such savage dishonor. Men who had lost fathers, sons, and brothers in the war glared at Robb as though the very consideration of this was a betrayal. But there were also those who questioned if the war could truly be won if the South united behind the Lannisters. Stannis Baratheon was out there, Renly Baratheon had been, and now might be stirring again through his supporters. The Tyrells were restless, the Greyjoys had begun their raids in the north, and a new front threatened to tear Robb's homeland apart. So many storms at once, and the north had only so many spears. That night, Robb barely slept. He paced in his solar, candlelight dancing over the carved wooden walls. Outside, the waters of the Red Fork glimmered in the moonlight. He thought of his father, Ned Stark, stoic and honorable. Would Ned have countenanced such a union even for the sake of peace? At first, Robb didn't think so. Ned had been a man of unshakable principle, and he'd once told Robb, when you make alliances with your enemies, be sure you know whether they will keep faith. Yet there was also something else his father had taught him, if only indirectly. Sometimes the cost of war was too high to pay. Duty was the core of House Stark's words. Duty, honor, but also a father's unwavering love for his people. Ned might not have approved, but Ned was gone. And the realm was on the brink of ruin. The next day, Robb gave his answer in the very same hall. I will wed Cersei Lannister, he declared, voice trembling in the hush. I will do so to spare the North further bloodshed and to bring an end to this war. But let it be known that I do not forget my father's blood nor the crimes committed against my house. If the Lannisters break faith, may the gods punish them as surely as the sun rises. Until then, let us have peace. A thunderous wave of exclamations rose up, some in anger, some in relief. Robb's own men looked torn. Lord Bolton, with his pale eyes, gave an unreadable smirk. The Greyjoy roared about Lannister treachery, but he did not openly defy Robb's chosen path. The Blackfish, Robb's great-uncle, stared in silent disapproval, though it seemed aimed at Tywin's cunning more than at Robb. Lady Catelyn merely inclined her head as though recognizing that no other choice could cut the knot of war so swiftly. They could keep fighting. They might win or they might lose. But if the marriage truly ended the bloodshed, then perhaps it was worth the risk. Within the fortnight, Cersei Lannister arrived, escorted by an honor guard of red-cloaked knights. She came in a gilded litter, her face hidden behind diaphanous curtains. Robb stood at the gates of Riverrun with his lords and bannermen. The day was gray, clouds bruising the horizon, and a cold wind blew off the river as if the very elements knew something monumental was about to occur. The men parted, letting the Lannisters pass. Cersei emerged from the litter with regal poise, dressed in an opulent gown of deep crimson, her golden hair neatly coiled. Her emerald eyes gleamed with calculation, but also with faint curiosity. She studied Riverrun's walls, then the young man before her, this northern king who now was to become her husband. Robb regarded her with what he hoped was calm composure. He bowed, and though she inclined her head in something that approximated respect, there was a flicker of condescension in her eyes. She was older, more experienced in the games of court, and even though she was handing herself over in marriage to a man who had been her enemy, she gave no sign of feeling compromised. This was a woman who had ruled as queen for years, who had navigated the labyrinth of King's Landing's intrigues. Her father's daughter, through and through. She looked Robb over as if measuring him for a measure of threat or advantage, and then extended her hand. Robb touched her fingers gingerly. For a heartbeat, he felt heat coil beneath his skin, not born of desire but of raw tension. There was a finality to the moment that threatened to shake him to his core. If he did this, there was no turning back. Yet the wedding proceeded. Word spread quickly, and many from the Riverlands arrived out of curiosity or quiet hope that hostilities might truly end. Under a small sept set up in Riverrun's courtyard, since the castle's own sept was too small for the gathering, they recited the vows. The septon's voice echoed against the high walls as Cersei vowed to take Robb as her husband, and he vowed to take her as his wife, to love and honor. Could he truly do that? He wondered, standing before the seven. He felt a pang of guilt for the memory of Talisa, his late wife in another timeline, or in this one, the woman he'd never met if the future was changed, but that was an ephemeral vision conjured by his regrets. Right now, there was only this vow, this moment, to save countless lives. When it was done, they kissed dutifully, his lips brushing hers in an uncomfortable, too intimate display that felt forced and hollow. The lords and ladies gathered cheered with requisite fervor, though undercurrents of unease snaked beneath the applause. Cersei looked at him with that same feline curiosity, as if to say, we'll see how this goes. That night, a feast was held in the Great Hall. The tension, though masked by wine and bread, remained thick in the air. Lannister retainers in their red and gold finery faced off from across tables with Northmen in their wolf-emblazoned cloaks, each group eyeing the other as though expecting knives to fly at any instant. And perhaps they might have if not for the knowledge that any outbreak of violence would doom the entire peace. Music played and minstrels sang odes to the union, praising the generosity of the bride and the gallantry of the groom, but no amount of tune could quell the undercurrent that the realm was witnessing something both extraordinary and potentially calamitous. Robb drifted through the feast, exchanging pleasantries with lords from the Riverlands and the north. He offered stiff nods to the Lannisters who had come, among them Kevan Lannister, Tywin's brother, who eyed him with polite reserve. Robb thought to speak with Cersei to try to glean her intentions, but each time he drew close, she was already entangled in conversation, sometimes with his mother, sometimes with other high-born ladies. He caught bits of her laughter, low and confident, as though she were telling some witty secret. He couldn't parse sincerity from show. She had a talent for wearing masks. He steeled himself for what it meant to be husband and wife in more than name. Later, in the silence of their shared chamber, she said little. She took in the modest furnishings of Riverrun's best guest quarters, a canopied bed, plain stone hearth, a single table. She set aside her jewels with meticulous grace, removing earrings, bracelets, ring, as if performing a ritual. At last, she turned to face him, the candlelight dancing on the planes of her face. There was still a beauty about her, undeniably, her lips parted in faint amusement. He realized with a jolt that she was older than he by many years, that her children must be near the age difference between them. The thought made his stomach knot. He had warred against her family, he had demanded justice for his father's death from her house. Now he was expected to share her bed. It was a collision of events that neither he nor the gods could have predicted. Her voice was low, almost a purr. "I see you are more uneasy than a frightened hare in a fox's den, my lord husband. Are you frightened of me?" Robb's throat felt parched. He swallowed, forced a calm he didn't entirely feel. "No, my lady." Her eyebrows arched at the formal address. "I should call you your grace, as you are a queen." She stepped toward him, trailing a single finger along the edge of the table. "I was queen, yes. Now it seems I must shape myself into the queen of the north. Or at least, your lady. Your people will never accept me, you know." "Not truly. But that does not matter. We each have a role to play, do we not?" He studied her posture. She was neither shy nor yielding. "We do," he replied. "I cannot pretend that this is a happy union, but I hope it will be a peaceful one." Her laugh was mirthless, barely audible. "Peaceful? Yes, that would be a welcome novelty after the mess of these past moons. But Robb, you must not forget who holds the strings behind this arrangement. My father never does anything without benefit. He will watch us closely. Remember that." He took a half-step forward, bracing himself to confront her. "And you? Do you seek your own advantage in this marriage?" She smiled, slow, languid. "Of course. I always do. But advantage can mean many things. For now, perhaps the best advantage is ensuring neither of us ends up a corpse. Don't you think?" Then her eyes slid over him, an almost predatory glint within. "But you have more than that on your mind, I suspect." He looked away, uncertain how to respond. He was a soldier, a son of the North, not a courtier skilled in the lethal banter of King's Landing. In truth, her presence unnerved him. He could see the cunning behind her beauty, and it made him wonder if he had married something far more dangerous than any Lannister army. Yet he forced himself to recall the faces of his men, the devastation the war had wrought. This was the cost to stop the bleeding. "If it keeps the North from further war," he said quietly, "then I'll see it done. We may not be friends, but we are allies now." She stepped closer, her perfume drifting into his senses. She placed a hand lightly on his chest. "Allies," she repeated, voice thick with meaning. "Then as your ally, let me counsel you. When dealing with my father, or indeed any Lannister, never show weakness, never show doubt. We devour those who flinch. Keep your wolfish pride, and it may yet keep you alive." It was as close to a kindness as she had ever offered him, even if delivered in the shape of a threat. He nodded. "Thank you for the advice." The flicker of a sardonic smile graced her lips. Then she turned away, beginning to unlace the back of her gown. He cleared his throat and moved to offer assistance, all too aware of the tension coiling between them. Their wedding night, he thought grimly. He doubted it would be a night for love, but for duty, and so it was. The next morning, the news that the marriage had been consummated, at least in the technical sense, rippled through the castle. A new day dawned, though it was as overcast as the one before. Messengers flew from Riverrun to every corner of the realm. The War of the Five Kings, it seemed, was shifting toward an uneasy truce. The bannermen tested it warily, as if suspecting that even the gods themselves might strike them down for forging such an alliance. But the ravens carried official proclamations. Robb Stark, king in the north, had bent the knee and accepted the bride of House Lannister. In return, House Lannister pledged that the North's autonomy would be respected in all matters but name. Robb would serve as Warden of the North. No southern armies would cross the neck. No further bloodshed would be visited upon northern soil. Of course, scattered battles still raged. Some lords refused to concede that the war might be over. The Ironborn still held Moat Cailin and parts of the northern coast. Yet with Tywin's promise to withdraw his support from Balon Greyjoy and with the threat of Lannister might looming in the west, the Ironborn's advantage might well wither. Slowly, the realm braced itself for a new status quo, uncertain of how long it would last. In Riverrun, tension remained thick. Robb held council with his mother, the Blackfish, and those northern lords who remained loyal, explaining what must be done to rally the men, ensure the highways were safe, quell the outrages of Reaving. It chafed many that they must do so under the pretense of a Lannister alliance. Yet Robb reminded them that it was for the sake of the North, that if Tywin's word was true, they could heal the scars of war and rebuild. Perhaps that was enough for some. Others only bowed their heads in grudging acceptance. The real challenge was forging any semblance of companionship with Cersei. She did not pretend gentleness among the northern folk. She exuded a quiet contempt for the chill of the air, the simpler feasts, and the plain talk of the bannermen. She privately told Robb, "You people know little of politics. All you think of is steel and snow." And he had retorted, "Steel and snow keep us alive in the north." She smirked at that. Yet for all their barbs, there were fleeting moments of uneasy solidarity, especially when they found themselves contending with outside threats. A fortnight after the wedding, word came that the Ironborn had raided inland from the Stony Shore. With the Lannisters allied to the Starks, Balon Greyjoy took the chance to strike before he lost all hope of southern backing. In response, Robb marshaled a swift host, calling upon the River Lords and remaining northern forces to drive them back. He prepared to ride at the head of the troops. Lady Catelyn tried to dissuade him, urging caution, but Robb refused to appear weak. "If I stay behind, my men will think I've grown lax with peace," he argued, "and the Ironborn will sense an opening." He turned to Cersei, who had been listening from a plush chair in the solar, her legs crossed. He expected a sneer or a mocking word. Instead, she surprised him. "You should go," she said. "Show your banner. Show them that the wolf still has teeth. My father respects strength. If you bow to these raiders, you'll only be inviting more trouble." Her green eyes glinted. "Let them learn that a union with House Lannister does not make you a puppet." Her words settled an unease in him. There was some twisted sense in what she said. Perhaps she, too, understood that if Robb proved himself a strong ally, ruthless, even Tywin would keep his end of the bargain. Nodding, Robb made ready to depart. He led his host north, pushing toward the coastal lands. The Ironborn had dug in at Moat Cailin, but news of Robb's approach with a strong force made them hesitant to come out for pitched battle. Instead, a series of skirmishes erupted along the swamps of the Neck. The terrain was treacherous. But Robb knew it from his father's tales, and with the help of the crannogmen loyal to House Reed, they began to systematically whittle down the Ironborn positions. All the while, Robb felt a strange mixture of conviction and remorse. He recalled the last time he'd marched to war, brimming with the righteous fury of a son whose father had been murdered. Now he was playing a political game, forging alliances with those responsible for that murder, indirectly if not by their own hands. He wondered what the men under his command thought. Some still had vengeance in their hearts, others weariness. But they fought as they always had, loyal to the name Stark. After several weeks, Moat Cailin surrendered. Many Ironborn were put to the sword, the rest fled back to their ships. The cost was high, but nowhere near as devastating as prolonged war would have been. Robb left a garrison of loyal men under the watch of Roose Bolton, who had proven unervingly capable in dealing with subterfuge. Robb didn't entirely trust Bolton. Something about the man's pale eyes gave him pause, but he needed a steward in the region. Then, satisfied the threat had abated, he returned south to Riverrun, uneasy. He arrived to find new tensions brewing within his household. Word had reached them that Joffrey Baratheon, the boy king who sat the Iron Throne, was outraged by this marriage. Officially, Joffrey was the son of King Robert, but Robb knew, as many suspected, that he was a product of Cersei's incest with her twin Jaime. Now, with Cersei wed to Robb, rumors swirled that Joffrey planned to disown his mother, to call her traitor for allying with rebels. Was that Tywin's plan all along? cut Joffrey loose if he became a liability while forging a more stable alliance with the North. Cersei's mood darkened in those days. She paced the halls of Riverrun as if caged, her gown whispering against the stone floors. Servants whispered that they had heard her cursing her father for not reigning and Joffrey cursing Joffrey for his childish tantrums. Robb couldn't help but feel a grim sympathy. She was a mother separated from her children. If Joffrey turned the realm against her, where did that leave Myrcella and Tommen? Yet that was precisely the sort of wedge Tywin might exploit to keep Cersei obedient. The Lannisters were not above using their own children as pawns. That was the game they played. Still, the days passed and peace began to feel somewhat less fragile. Mercenaries that had once plagued the Riverlands retreated. Bandits found themselves outnumbered by combined Stark and Tully patrols. Ravaged villages cautiously rebuilt. Winter was still coming, the days were growing shorter, and people needed peace to gather harvests. Some lords grumbled about the king in the north bending to a Lannister bride, but the common folk only cared that there were fewer swords at their throats. Even among Robb's camp, certain men began to see the marriage as a pragmatic stroke of cunning. It was said that Tywin was so relentless an enemy that a simple wedding vow might have done what thousands of swords could not, bind him to the north in fealty. If that was what it took, so be it. Others remained unconvinced, expecting betrayal at any moment. One crisp morning, Robb found Cersei standing on a balcony overlooking the Trident, the river's surface catching the sunlight in dazzling ripples. She wore a fur-lined cloak he had given her, wolf's fur, ironically enough. Her golden hair was pinned in a simple braid, less ostentatious than usual, but no less regal. For a moment she looked almost at peace, eyes focused on the horizon. He cleared his throat gently. She turned, raising an eyebrow. "King in the north. Come to check if I've flown away?" she asked, half mocking, half wry. He stepped closer, folding his arms. "If you were going to flee, I suspect you'd have done it by now." She let out a soft laugh. "As if there's anywhere to go. My father has laid out the board. I'm to stay here, play the loyal wife, maintain the illusion of unity until the realm is stable enough for him to tighten the strings. That is how he operates." Robb studied her features. He thought back to all the tales he'd heard of her cruelty, her manipulations. Part of him still hated her for the role she'd played in his father's downfall. But he also saw that she was trapped in Tywin's machinations as much as anyone else. "You don't sound pleased," he observed. She slid a hand along the stone railing, a faint bitterness twisting her mouth. "Pleased? No. But I've learned that in order to survive, you do what you must. You, of all people, should understand that. Wasn't that why you married me?" He couldn't deny it. "Yes," he said simply. "I did it for my people. For the North." She turned, leaning her hip against the railing. Her eyes flicked over his face. "How noble." There was a pause, then a slight softening. "You might find that alliances forged in necessity can breed a twisted form of loyalty. We may not love each other, Robb Stark, but we can learn to use one another well without drawing blood. That is, if we are wise." He let the words hang in the crisp air before replying, "And if we are not wise?" She shrugged with a half-smile. "Then the realm will drown in the blood of another war." A moment later, she pushed off the railing and glided past him, the faint perfume trailing in her wake. He watched her go, feeling the weight of responsibility anew. Time moved forward. In King's Landing, Joffrey shrieked and raged about his mother's betrayal. Yet Tywin quietly contained the damage. Lords who had once sworn to House Baratheon of King's Landing found themselves courted by Lannister gold, reminded that King Joffrey was only a boy with Tywin as regent. Whispers circulated that if Joffrey rebelled, the crown might even pass to Tommen or Myrcella under Tywin's guidance. Robb's half-brother, Jon Snow, was far away at the Wall, out of reach from these southern games. Robb found himself oddly grateful for that distance. At least one member of his family was beyond the toxic coils of Lannister influence. Cersei and Robb traveled together to the Twins that autumn at the insistence of Lord Walder Frey, who demanded a chance to see the new bride. Robb had dreaded the meeting. He remembered all too well how fragile Frey alliances could be. But in a surprising turn, Walder Frey greeted them with something akin to courtesy, more out of grudging respect for the Lannister name than any love for the Starks. The old man cackled about how you traded one marriage for another. Boy? But this one is a mite fancier, I'd wager. Robb stiffened, but Cersei only smiled thinly at the lecherous remarks and quietly endured. Seeing that she didn't flinch at Walder's crude jests, Robb felt a grudging admiration. Even in enemy territory, if one could call the Twins an ally, she never lost her composure. Yet beneath that composure, he sensed her frustration. During a private moment, she confided, "He's a lecherous old goat, no better than some back-alley swineherd. Your father made a poor alliance here, it seems." Rob had to stifle a laugh. He nodded. "Fry loyalty is conditional at best. I've learned that the hard way." Their departure from the twins was swift, and in the quiet of the night, Rob found himself whispering to Grey Wind, stoking the direwolf's fur. The great beast licked his hand, a comforting presence. "It's all changed, boy," Rob murmured. "I wonder what father would think of me now." The direwolf's eyes glowed in the dim torchlight, offering neither judgment nor approval, only loyalty. Riverrun remained their seat through the fall, with the war effectively ended though the realm's tensions were far from resolved. A letter came from Sansa in King's Landing. She wrote tentatively, in words carefully chosen, that she'd heard of her brother's marriage. She asked if it was true that their mother was well, if the North truly found peace. There was a coded tone to the letter, suggesting the place remained dangerous. Tyrion, the imp, was said to hold some measure of power as the king's hand, and Joffrey grew crueler by the day. Rob read the letter in private and then burned it in the hearth, promising himself he would find a way to ensure his sister's safety. The alliance with Cersei might open paths. If she still carried influence with her father, perhaps Sansa, and even Arya, if she still lived, could be freed from the south. But he had to tread carefully. He did not fully trust that Cersei would help him in that regard, though he recognized her maternal instincts for Myrcella and Tommen. Winter's first snows arrived sooner in the north, while in the Riverlands only a thin frost dusted the fields. In those months, Cersei began to host small gatherings with the ladies of the Riverlords. She proved adept at gossip and forging superficial bonds, gleaning knowledge about local rivalries. Rob recognized her strategy. She was consolidating her position, ensuring that if trouble flared, she would have her own network of loyalty. And curiously, that network might prove a boon for Rob as well if they operated together. He had to remind himself that they were married, that they were supposed to be partners in governance. The notion of trusting her was alien, but necessity demanded at least the semblance of cooperation. One evening they shared a late supper in the Solar. Catelyn was absent, dealing with a matter of inheritance among her Tully kin. It was just the two of them, an awkward arrangement. Rob sipped wine from a carved wooden cup while Cersei picked idly at a platter of roasted capon. There was a lull in the conversation, the crackle of the hearth filling the silence. At length, Cersei said, "You've grown taller since I first saw you enter King's Landing, following your father." Rob blinked, setting his cup down. "That was years ago. I was just a boy." A small, reminiscent smile tugged at her lips. "I remember. You were proud but uncertain. You had that wolfish nature about you even then. I never imagined we'd be here. But the gods are whimsical." He studied her face, uncertain if she was mocking him or truly recalling a memory. "I never expected to set foot in the Red Keep again. Nor to have you as my wife." She dipped her head in acknowledgement. "Nor I to be forced from my position in King's Landing, married off to quell a rebellion. Yet here we are." Her eyes flicked over him, an assessing gaze. "I wonder if we might make more of this alliance than simple grudging compliance. My father respects results. If you and I prove capable rulers of these Riverlands and the North, of course, then perhaps we can shape the realm in ways that suit us both." He felt a spark of intrigue. "Meaning what, exactly?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Meaning we need not remain forever in his shadow. With the right balance of fear and loyalty, we could secure these lands beyond question. Tywin would have no choice but to keep us in favor. I've never believed in the small illusions of love and devotion that so many spout. I believe in power. And if we can hold power, we can protect ourselves and those we care about." Rob thought of the North, battered by war. He thought of Sansa in King's Landing, Arya lost, Bran and Rickon rumored to be in hiding after the Greyjoy occupation. "And how would you suggest we hold power?" he asked guardedly. Cersei brushed a curl away from her face, her tone measured. "You've shown martial prowess. That's half the equation. You can rally armies and your men would follow you into the Seven Hells if you demanded it. I can navigate the political webs that might ensnare us. These river lords, Tully, Fry, Mallister, Bracken, Blackwood, they all have their feuds, their alliances. I can learn to play them against each other without it ever escalating into open war. We can keep them in balance, loyal to you as their warden. Meanwhile, the Lannisters in the south will not risk direct conflict if we remain strong but not openly defiant. If we manage that, your mother can see your siblings freed eventually and the north can rebuild unharassed. Is that not what you desire? He studied her carefully, searching for the trap. But everything she said was plausible even if it sounded cold-blooded. He gave a slow nod. It is. I do want the north safe, my sister's home, my brother secure at the wall. If you can help me achieve that, then yes, I'll do what's needed. Her lips curved into a satisfied smile. Then perhaps we understand each other, husband. She raised her goblet of wine in a mock toast, and Rob, with a sense of inevitability, tapped his cup to hers. From that evening on, a subtle shift occurred in their dynamic. Not warmth, there was little chance of that, but a kind of pragmatic partnership. When a river lord came forward to request a settlement of a land dispute, Rob would weigh the military or feudal aspects, and Cersei would weigh the political cost. They began to present a united front, unsettling both the lords who had expected to easily manipulate the youthful king in the north and the Lannister knights who had assumed Cersei would remain aloof. In quiet corners, men whispered that the king in the north and his lioness bride had found a cunning synergy. Lady Catelyn watched with cautious hope, though Rob suspected his mother would never truly trust Cersei. Still, if it meant less bloodshed, she tolerated the arrangement. The Blackfish remained skeptical. A wolf dancing with a lion, he said once, rarely ends well for the wolf. But Rob believed it was not simply a dance, he was forging something that might change the entire realm's fate. Or so he tried to convince himself on sleepless nights. Tywin Lannister, for his part, rarely wrote. His communications came in the form of official decrees or short letters instructing them on minor matters, requests for trade, tariffs, discussions about the Iron Throne's finances. The man was notoriously frugal with praise and cunning with silence. By ignoring them for the most part, Tywin allowed the tension to simmer. It wasn't until a letter came from Tyrion Lannister, the Hand of the King, that Rob began to see the outline of the next challenge. Tyrion wrote in a polite, almost affable tone, describing how King Joffrey was growing more erratic. The small council was divided on whether to forcibly remove Joffrey from power, placing Tommen on the throne under Tywin's regency. Tyrion requested that Rob and Cersei travel to King's Landing to show unity to help quell the chaos. Your presence may remind his grace of his place, Tyrion's letter read in its elegant scrawl. And if that fails, it may help us remove him from the throne with minimal outcry from the lords. Rob showed the letter to Cersei in private. She read it twice, her brows knitting. When she looked up, he saw genuine worry. If Joffrey is truly losing control, my children, Myrcella, Tommen, are at risk. He nodded. If we go to King's Landing, we walk into the lion's den. No pun intended. But if we do not go, Tyrion might fail and Joffrey might lash out at Sansa, at your other children, at the realm. Cersei pressed her lips together. We must go. But we must not go alone. Bring men you trust, your mother's counsel. I will reach out to certain allies in the city. We can do this if we act decisively. One way or another, Joffrey must be controlled. So they prepared for a journey south. Once, Rob had left Winterfell with a sense of adventure, believing King's Landing was some distant wonder. Now it felt like marching into a nest of vipers. But he had changed since then, older, harder. He had faced battles, betrayals, the agony of losing his father, and a forced marriage to his enemy. Perhaps he was ready for the intrigues of the capital. They set out on the King's Road, a retinue of Stark and Tully bannermen, plus a modest guard of Lannister men. Cersei rode in a carriage, occasionally stepping out to ride alongside Rob for appearance's sake. The journey was long, the nights cold, but they pressed on. Rumors traveled faster than them, carrying tales of how the king in the north and the Dowager Queen would descend upon the Red Keep. By the time they passed through the gate of King's Landing, the city was abuzz. The small folk crowded the streets, uncertain whether to cheer or jeer. They saw the Stark direwolf sigil flying beside the Golden Lion standard of Lannister. A jarring sight. The guards at the gate parted, letting them through. Tyrion himself met them in the courtyard, bowing theatrically to his sister and to Rob. He wore a dark velvet doublet pinned with a hand of the king's brooch. "My dear sister," he said in that lightly mocking tone, "and my dear brother-in-law, how delightful to see you." Rob stared down at the dwarf, trying to read him. He had heard many accounts of Tyrion's wit and cunning. "Lord Tyrion," he returned with careful courtesy. Tyrion turned to Cersei. I trust your journey was smooth? No rebellious river lords decided to dispatch you both en route. Cersei dismounted her horse with practiced grace, ignoring the offered hand of a stable boy. If they did, they would have found themselves short ahead, she said coolly. Then, with a glance around, she asked, How bad is it? Tyrion's lips twitched into a half-frown. Bad enough. Joffrey has taken to punishing minor courtiers for perceived slights. He had one knight whipped for stepping on his shadow in the throne room. The city is on edge. Father has been trying to keep him in check, but Joffrey no longer listens to reason. We may be days away from a riot. Cersei's face tightened. And my children? They are in the Red Keep, safe for now. Tommen is well, Myrcella is anxious. Joffrey seems to ignore them, which is a small mercy. Tyrion nodded to Robb. I trust you have the steel to keep the peace if Joffrey decides to get violent. You might have to. There are gold cloaks still loyal to me, but not enough if the worst comes. Robb felt a cold heaviness in his chest. He had marched to King's Landing once in a dream of vengeance, imagining liberating his father or toppling the Lannisters. Now he was here to preserve a twisted peace that hinged on keeping a lunatic boy king from burning the city. My men will do what is necessary, he said simply. And so they entered the Red Keep, a place steeped in memory and bitterness for Robb. He passed the throne room where Ned Stark had stood, where he had been condemned. The hallways teemed with courtiers and guards, all of whom eyed him and his retinue warily. Some parted in deference, for he was still a king in name, though he had knelt to the Iron Throne. Others scowled, seeing him as a rebel. The tension was palpable. Nonetheless, Tyrion ushered them up to private chambers near the Queen's rooms. There, in a plush corridor of gilded sconces, Tommen and Myrcella waited, flanked by guards. Upon seeing their mother, they ran to her, hugging her tight. The normally composed Cersei exhaled in visible relief, wrapping them both in her arms. Robb stood back, watching the reunion. Tommen was still young, cherubic-faced, while Myrcella had grown into a graceful teenager. They eyed Robb curiously, uncertain how to greet the man who was now their stepfather in name. He offered a stiff nod, not wanting to intrude on their moment. This was the cost of forging alliances, stepping into the complicated bonds of a family that was once his mortal foe. Soon enough, they were summoned to the throne room for an audience with Joffrey. The hall was lined with gold cloaks in polished armor, and the echo of their footsteps on the marble floor stretched ominously. At the far end, on the Iron Throne, sat King Joffrey, crowned tilde slightly on his golden hair. His sneer was immediate upon seeing his mother walk in with Robb Stark. So the wolf has come to kneel again, he said, voice resonating with false bravado. Robb held his temper. He bent his knee in the manner required by courtesy. Cersei dropped a small curtsy, though her expression was tight. Tyrion stood at the base of the steps, watching with sharp eyes. The lords and ladies around the court whispered among themselves. Cersei stepped forward, addressing Joffrey with careful restraint. Your Grace, we are here at Lord Tywin's request to ensure stability in your realm. She did not call him my son in public, perhaps to preserve the veneer of formality. Joffrey spat. Stability? Yes, I see. So you marry our enemy, parade him through our gates, and then speak of stability. His eyes flicked to Robb. If I had my way, I'd put your head on a spike beside your traitor father's. Robb's hands clenched at that reference to Ned Stark's execution. Yet he forced calm. He had come here to maintain peace, not to start a bloodbath. Your Grace, he said, voice measured, I'm here under Lord Tywin's word that the war between us is over. If you do not wish to abide by your grandfather's counsel, then you are free to break the truce. A hush fell. Joffrey's eyes blazed with fury. Don't you dare speak to me that way, traitor. His hand went to his crossbow leaning beside the throne. A wave of tension rippled through the hall. Robb could feel his men behind him, bristling. Cersei's face blanched. Before Joffrey could seize the crossbow, a commotion sounded at the hall's entrance. Tywin Lannister himself strode in, dressed in dark armor gilded with gold. His weathered face was a mask of displeasure. The entire court parted before him. He descended to the throne, ignoring Joffrey's glare. Joffrey, he said, voice soft but laced with steel, I see you are greeting our guests in your usual manner. Joffrey's hand remained on the crossbow. Grandfather, he said through gritted teeth. Why didn't you warn me you were coming? Tywin ignored the question, turning to address the court. The realm owes a debt of gratitude to Lord Robb Stark and Lady Cersei Lannister for forging a path to peace in the Riverlands. The king in the north has bent the knee to show his loyalty, and in return I have pledged that no harm shall come to him or his house. If anyone here has an objection to that arrangement, speak now. A weighted silence followed. No one dared defy Tywin Lannister in open court, not with armed guards present, not with the memory of how swiftly Tywin crushed foes. Even Joffrey seemed momentarily cowed, though resentment sparkled in his eyes. Tyrion let out a silent breath. Tywin looked back to Joffrey. We will have a private council meeting in 1 hour. You will be present and show the dignity expected of a king. Is that understood? Joffrey glowered, but he nodded stiffly, his hand dropping from the crossbow. The tension began to ease. Robb stood, heart pounding with residual anger. He met Tywin's gaze. The Lord of Casterly Rock gave a curt nod, then turned on his heel and swept from the throne room, leaving the courtiers to disperse in a flurry of anxious whispers. Cersei exhaled, stepping closer to Robb. That, she murmured bitterly, is a taste of what we face here. Do you see? Robb swallowed, recalling the moment Joffrey had spoken of putting his head beside Ned's. The old rage flickered, but he nodded, forcing composure. Yes, he said softly. I see. And so began their fraught stay in King's Landing. The private council meeting was tense, with Tywin dominating the conversation. Plans were laid to quell the city's unrest, reassign certain gold cloaks loyal to Joffrey, and quietly position Tommen as a future alternative. Robb listened, contributing little, focusing on how to ensure his sisters were safe. Meanwhile, Cersei maneuvered behind the scenes, pressing her father for reassurances about Myrcella and Tommen's status. Tyrion orchestrated alliances among the lesser lords. Varys appeared occasionally in the corridors with his soft whispers, his little birds. Peter Baelish was absent, away on some errand in the Vale. Each day brought new intrigues. Through it all, the marriage between Robb and Cersei proved to be a surprising anchor. The court saw them as a formidable pair, in part because no one could quite fathom how a Starkwolf and a Lannister lioness could share a bed without clawing each other to death. Rumors abounded, some said Robb was bewitched, others that Cersei was forced by Tywin, and still others that it was all a grand ploy to usurp Joffrey. Whispers filled the Red Keep's halls, fueling speculation that if Joffrey was removed, Robb Stark might become regent for Tommen or even crown himself. Tywin let these rumors swirl, never confirming or denying them, using them to keep Joffrey in line. All the while, Robb grew more determined to secure Sansa's release. Finally, he confronted Tywin directly in the council chamber after a meeting. The others had departed, leaving only Cersei, Robb, and Tywin. Robb took a breath and said, My lord, the North has abided by its pledge of peace. We have honored our marriage alliance. I ask that you show good faith by releasing my sister Sansa from King's Landing. She has suffered enough. Tywin's pale green eyes rested on Robb. And how do I know you won't whisk her away to the North and then declare war anew? Robb tamped down his frustration. Because the North wants no more war, not if the Lannisters remain loyal to this truce. We wish to rebuild. And Sansa is a lady of my house. I won't have her used as a hostage any longer. Tywin glanced at Cersei, who said nothing but watched with an inscrutable gaze. Then Tywin looked back at Robb. Very well. If you can assure me that Sansa will remain in the Riverlands under your mother's supervision, I see no reason to keep her here. She is betrothed to no one of significance at the moment. She was once betrothed to Joffrey, Robb spat. A farce of a betrothal. Tywin raised a hand, cautioning him to mind his tone. We can annul that match. You may have her placed in your mother's keeping at Riverrun. A pause. But do not forget, if you break our alliance, we will claim her again, and your house will face our wrath. Is that understood? Robb ground his teeth, but he nodded. Understood. He had no illusions that Tywin's word was absolute. Still, it was a step closer to reuniting with a sister. She would be safer at Riverrun among the Tully and Stark loyalists. He glanced at Cersei, half expecting her to interject. But she only tilted her head slightly as though acknowledging a small victory. Perhaps she realized it was necessary to keep Robb placated, to keep the alliance stable. The next day, Sansa was freed from her gilded captivity. She arrived at the wing of the Red Keep assigned to Robb and Cersei, escorted by gold cloaks. Upon seeing her brother, Sansa's eyes filled with tears. She curtsied shakily as though unsure if she must treat him as a king or as family. Robb drew her into an embrace. She trembled against him, relief flooding her face. He smoothed her hair, whispering that it was all right, that she would go to Riverrun with their mother. She only sobbed softly, the weight of captivity lifting. Cersei stood by, watching the reunion with guarded detachment as if it were a play unfolding. In the days that followed, Robb arranged Sansa's departure with an escort of Northmen and Riverlords. He wanted to go himself, but Tywin insisted he remain in King's Landing a while longer to solidify the new order. So Lady Catelyn accompanied Sansa, leading a retinue back to Riverrun. Before they left, Robb embraced his mother, murmuring that he would see her soon. She nodded, eyes reflecting worry. She did not trust the capital, nor Tywin, nor the precarious game that kept her son ensnared. But she had little choice if they were to maintain peace. Winter edged closer, the winds blowing colder across the city's harbor. Joffrey's behavior continued to spiral. He delighted in tormenting servants, abusing courtiers. More than once, Tyrion or Tywin had to intervene to prevent tragedy. Gradually, the city came to understand that Joffrey was no longer truly in power. Tywin commanded the Gold Cloaks, Tyrion orchestrated the administration, Cersei orchestrated alliances. Robb's presence as a victorious war leader lent an intimidation factor. Joffrey raged and postured, but he was contained. The common folk, exhausted by war, prayed for no more madness. Late one night, Cersei found Robb in a secluded garden off the royal apartments. He was pacing beside a black marble fountain shaped like a coiling dragon. The moon cast silver highlights on his auburn hair, and the air smelled of night-blooming flowers. He glanced up at her approach, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. She looked at him for a moment before speaking. Tyrion thinks we may have to forcibly remove Joffrey soon. He's lost the support of half the Gold Cloaks. The city hates him, and Father has begun to talk with Pycelle and other members of the council about coronating Tommen. Robb exhaled. What does that mean for us? Are we to remain here as this unfolds? Cersei's gaze flicked to the fountain's surface. We may need you, or at least your men, to keep order if Joffrey tries to fight. Father is concerned that if we don't act quickly, Joffrey will do something catastrophic. A grim sense of inevitability filled Robb. So I'm to help overthrow your son. That is the cost of peace now. He shook his head in disbelief. The realm truly is twisted. She gave a bitter little laugh. Do you think I wish to see him harmed? He's still my child, for all that he's turned vicious. She paused, pain flickering in her eyes. But I know the harm he can do. Perhaps removing him is the kinder act to the realm and to him. Tommen will be a gentler king, easily guided. And Myrcella? Well, in time we might bring her back from Dorne. Robb studied the lines of her face, seeing a weariness there. You truly believe this is what must be done? She looked away, arms folded. My father believes it, and he's not often wrong in these matters. You and I have aligned ourselves to his plan, knowingly or not. We stand to benefit. The North remains safe, the Riverlands calm, and you secure your hold so long as you do not oppose him. Is that not what we set out to achieve? He let out a ragged breath. Yes, he said quietly. We wanted to save the North, and we have so far. A pause. I just never imagined it would come to this. Cersei reached out, her hand lightly brushing his. None of this is easy, but we do what we must. Her voice held a strange note of empathy. They stood there under the moon, each bound by the decisions that had led them to this point. Two figures from once opposing families, forging an uneasy pact to shape the realm. Robb thought again of the father he'd lost, of how Ned might judge all this. Yet, if it spared the North, if it ended the bloodshed, perhaps Ned would understand. Perhaps. When the coup against Joffrey finally occurred, it was swift and meticulously planned. Tywin convened the small council, summoning Joffrey to attend. Joffrey arrived with a handful of Gold Cloaks still loyal to him, but upon entering, he found Tywin had replaced them. Robb stood with half a dozen Northmen, Tyrion with a contingent of the City Watch. Kevan Lannister blocked the door. Pycelle quivered but followed Tywin's lead. Joffrey screeched in fury, demanding to know what they dared do. Tywin pronounced him unfit to rule, invoked the authority of the realm to install Tommen as king. Robb watched Joffrey's eyes dart for a weapon, but men seized him before he could act. The boy king cursed, foaming with rage, but the guards dragged him away. Later, they would confine him to his chambers under heavy watch. Rumors said Tywin might send him to Casterly Rock, or the Faith might confine him in the Great September. Tommen was proclaimed King Tommen Baratheon, ninth of his name, though all knew he was Lannister-born. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief. The realm's civil war had ended in an improbable peace, sealed by the marriage of a wolf king and a lioness queen, culminating in the removal of the monstrous boy king. In the days and weeks that followed, Gold Cloaks patrolled the streets more gently. the markets buzzed anew, and visitors whispered that the capital was no longer a tinderbox. Tommen was a pliable child, easily guided by his mother, his grandfather, and the small council. Tyrion remained hand, forging new alliances. Meanwhile, Robb Stark stood as a living symbol that the North and the Crown were no longer at war. In the end, Robb returned to Riverrun, accompanied by Cersei. He left behind a stable King's Landing, at least for the moment. The city's intrigues still simmered, but the open conflict had ceased. Tywin had gotten what he wanted, a realm under Lannister influence, quietly subjugating rebellious factions without another war. Robb had gotten what he wanted, a breathing space for the North, a chance to rebuild, and the return of his sister. He had lost so much: his father, the illusions of honor untainted by compromise, and the innocence of youth. But he had gained an uneasy alliance that, for now, preserved the North from further devastation. As winter's chill deepened, Robb and Cersei rode through the gates of Riverrun. The castle felt like a sanctuary compared to King's Landing's machinations. Lady Catelyn greeted them in the courtyard with Sansa at her side. The sight of his sister, healthy and safe, warmed Robb's heart. Sansa curtsied gracefully to Cersei, a subtle tension in the gesture. Cersei inclined her head, no doubt recalling the days she had overshadowed the girl in the Red Keep. Neither spoke more than a polite greeting, but that was enough. They were no longer captor and captive. A new order reigned, at least for this moment in the realm's tumultuous history. That evening, Robb wandered the battlements with gray wind by his side. The sky was awash in stars, the riverlands quiet below. He thought of all that had happened since that day. He'd opened Tywin's letter offering Cersei's hand in marriage. So many battles avoided, so many alliances reforged in the name of peace. He had sacrificed his pride as an independent king, forging a marriage that still felt surreal. Yet in the hush of the night, he heard the distant laughter of freed villagers in the hamlets around the castle, no longer huddled in fear of raids. He smelled the cook fires from inside Riverrun, the sweet promise of respite. He felt the weight of decisions on his shoulders, but also a sense of grim satisfaction. The North would live. His mother still lived, his sister too. Others had paid the price, but at least the horror of constant war had relented. He turned to see Cersei approaching. She wore a heavy cloak against the chill. Gray Wind stared at her but made no move to growl. She halted beside Robb, peering out over the moonlit water. "You are quiet," she observed. He nodded. "Just thinking of the cost of all this." A pause. "Wondering if we did the right thing." She shrugged. "Right or wrong, we did what needed doing. The realm breathes again, however fitfully." She glanced at him. "Do you regret it?" He considered. Images of Ned's death, the battered North, Joffrey's tyranny, all flickered through his mind. Then he turned to her, meeting her gaze. "No," he said softly. "Not if it means the North will heal. Not if it spares others from suffering what my family did." She nodded, and for once the Queen's features softened a fraction. The night wind stirred her hair, carrying the scent of wood smoke and cold river. "Then perhaps we should make the most of this peace while it lasts. Men like my father always plan for the next war." But for now she trailed off, letting the unspoken truth hover. They stood side by side on the battlements, two unlikely allies who had once been mortal enemies. A dire wolf howled in the distance, echoed by the faint rustle of branches along the river. And so the night held them, witnesses to a fragile peace forged by a marriage that no one could have predicted, a union of wolf and lion that bought the realm a respite from the fires of war. Far away, in the stillness of the North, the promise of winter lingered. But for now, under the moonlit sky above Riverrun, Robb Stark let himself savor the smallest hope that the realm might endure and that some measure of justice, however imperfect, had been won. Robb Stark woke early the next morning to the sound of distant birdsong and the gentle lap of the Red Fork against Riverrun's walls. He lay still for a moment, letting the sense of quiet seep into him. Too often in these last months had he been roused by the clamor of swords or the tremor of urgent knocks on his door. Now it was only the hush of a castle stirring at dawn. Outside, the sun was just cresting the hills, painting the courtyard in a pale glow. He rose, pulled on breeches and a tunic, and slipped out of the chamber, leaving the faint warmth of the bed. Cersei, still drowsing, scarcely moved as he exited. She was not one to greet the morning with open arms. She preferred to rise later and command the day on her own terms. He padded down the corridor with Grey Wind at his side, the great direwolves paused silent on the worn stones. Servants whisked past, heads bowed, offering respectful greetings. It was a far cry from the open suspicion that had hung over the corridors at first. The men and women of Riverrun had grown accustomed to seeing their Lord King with the Lannister Queen. Yet acceptance was different from adoration. Some still murmured that this union was an affront to all that House Stark had suffered, that no vow of peace could erase the memory of Ned Stark's execution in King's Landing. Robb felt the weight of those judgments daily, but he had learned to carry that burden. His mind returned to the sight of Sansa, safe at last under Catelyn's guardianship. That alone made him reaffirm his resolve. He had done the only thing he believed might spare the North further ruin. He made his way outside, breathed in the crisp air. The courtyard was already bustling with stable hands and soldiers. Lord Blackwood's party had arrived just before dawn, some said, traveling south for trade or perhaps at the urging of Tywin's new edicts. Small caravans drifted in and out of Riverrun with greater frequency now. War had quieted and people yearned to resume normal life, though normal was a precarious term. Robb nodded to the guards by the gate. Grey Wind sniffed the morning air, bristling with interest as a line of wagons rolled under the portcullis. Barrels of salted fish, casks of ale, and sacks of grain. Rebuilding. It was a slow but visible effort, each day a little more hopeful. He decided to walk the ramparts, as he often did at sunrise. From up there, the view of the surrounding countryside reminded him why these sacrifices had been made. The farmland and scattered hamlets needed a chance to recover from pillage and forced levies. Smoke curled from small chimneys in the distance, promising kitchens and families that might survive the coming winter without the threat of armies trampling their fields. He exhaled in silent gratitude, stroking Grey Wind's head. The direwolf pressed close, sharing his quiet watch. Before long, he heard footsteps. Turning, he saw Lady Catelyn approaching, her cloak drawn tightly about her shoulders against the chill. She offered a small, weary smile. "You're an early riser," she said, her voice gentle with maternal affection. "I suspected I might find you here." He returned the smile. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I've had too many nights of unrest to ever truly trust the silence." She stood beside him, following his gaze over the rolling hills. "The realm seems calmer than I ever dared hope," she observed. "And yet, I know better than to trust peace too deeply. Do you think it will hold?" Robb was silent a moment. "Tywin's hold on King's Landing is as firm as ever. Tommen sits the throne now, guided by his grandfather. Joffrey is effectively removed from power. So yes, I suspect the peace will hold, at least until Tywin sees a reason to break it or until some new threat rises. I try not to dwell on that. Right now, we have an opportunity to rebuild. The North is battered and the Riverlands with it. Our people need reassurance." Catelyn studied her son's face. "You've grown so much, Robb," she murmured. "A man before your time. I wish it hadn't cost so much." He felt a pang. "I think of Father often. Of what he would say. I wonder if he would condemn me for marrying into the family that orchestrated his downfall. But I also know Father was a man of duty. He wanted to protect us, to do what was best for the realm. Perhaps he would have found another path. Or perhaps there was no other path at all." He shrugged, letting the words linger in the morning air. His mother reached out and gently squeezed his arm. "Your father loved you. He would be proud that you have fought for your people's well-being, even at great personal cost. None of us can know how he might have done things differently, but we can honor his memory by caring for the North. And for each other." They stood in companionable silence for a time until the distant clang of the smithy pulled Robb's attention. He remembered he had plans to inspect new weapons being forged and to speak with the blacksmith about reinforcing armor for the household guard. He excused himself, pecked his mother on the cheek, and headed down the steps with Grey Wind at his heels. Before he reached the smithy, however, a messenger found him, a young page panting for breath, clearly having run from the castle's main hall. "My lord, pardon, my lord," the boy gasped. She asks for you." Robb frowned. "Who asks for me?" "Queen Cersei," the page managed. "She's in the Great Hall." Something about a rider from King's Landing. Robb felt the old tension coil beneath his skin. Whenever news arrived from King's Landing, it seemed to carry the heavy weight of potential chaos. "Very well. Show me." He followed the boy back inside, through winding corridors until they reached the Great Hall. Torches burned despite the morning light pouring in through narrow windows. Seated at the high table was Cersei, dressed in a burgundy gown lined with black fur. She'd always had a knack for looking regal wherever she went, and though Riverrun's modest hall was a far cry from the Red Keep, she still wore that mantle of command as though it were her birthright. Beside her stood a Lannister guardsman with a sealed scroll in hand, doubtless the newest dispatch from King's Landing. Cersei beckoned Robb closer. "Good morning, husband," she said with a tone that held no real warmth but lacked the sharp edges it once might have had. "We've received a letter from my dear brother Tyrion." Robb gave a curt nod, stepping up to the dais. "I take it the news is important?" She accepted the scroll from the guard, broke the seal, and skimmed its contents. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then she handed it to Robb without preamble. "See for yourself." He scanned Tyrion's words. They were written in that neat, slanting hand he recognized from previous letters. The missive began with the usual pleasantries, but soon delved into a troubling development. There were whispers of discontent among certain lords who doubted the legitimacy of Tommen's reign. Some called him an impostor, a product of incest, though none openly declared it lest Tywin's fury descend upon them. Others whispered that, with Joffrey locked away, the realm should shift its loyalty to Stannis Baratheon, still alive albeit marginalized in the Stormlands. Then there was a rumor that the Targaryen girl across the narrow sea was gathering forces. And, as if that were not enough, the Ironborn had begun new raids, attacking trading vessels on the west coast, emboldened by the realm's uneasy transition of power. Robb's gaze lingered on Tyrion's concluding lines. "Our father ensures the capital remains calm, but I suspect some cunning serpent lurks in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We must remain vigilant, dear sister, and I suggest that your Wolf King husband also keep his eyes open. A stable north, allied with us, is vital. Remind him that if we stand together, we may weather these storms. If not, well, you recall what happened the last time distrust reigned between our houses." He set the scroll down. "Same threats, different day," he muttered under his breath. "So Tyrion wants us to remain locked in loyalty with the Lannisters in anticipation of new chaos. That's hardly a surprise." Cersei leaned back in her chair. "He's not wrong, though. If there is indeed a fresh wave of discontent, we can't ignore it. My father has worked too hard to secure Tommen's throne. If rebellious lords or foreign threats gather, the last thing we need is for the North to appear disloyal. The Iron Throne will want to see you publicly reaffirm your allegiance. You bent the knee, but that was months ago. People have short memories." Robb felt a flicker of resentment. "I will not ride south just to kneel before Tywin Lannister again. We've done enough. The king in the north is not going to dance attendance every time a rumor stirs. But at the same time, I do understand that the slightest whiff of betrayal could reignite war. The North can't afford that any more than the rest of the realm." Cersei studied him for a moment. "Then we must find another show of unity, something that assures the realm we stand as one." She tapped a slender finger on the table. "Perhaps a tour of important houses in the Riverlands, or an invitation to certain lords from the Crownlands to visit here under the banner of peace. Display your banners beside ours, host lavish feasts, distribute gifts. Appear to be the dutiful warden of the North, serving the realm's interest." He pressed his lips together. "You want me to play the gracious host, to wine and dine lords who once swore to see me dead?" She lifted a shoulder in a shrug of regal indifference. "Such is politics, Robb. Better to stomach a feast than a battlefield. Wouldn't you agree?" He let out a breath. The older he grew, the more he realized that the trappings of power were often little more than illusions. But illusions could hold men's hearts and shape destinies. "Fine," he said quietly. "I'll consider it. For now, we need to keep an eye on the Ironborn. They've tested our coasts before, and the North's harbors remain vulnerable. The last thing I want is a surprise raid that leaves Wintertown in ashes." Cersei nodded, though her concern for the North's harbors seemed more perfunctory than genuine. "Then let us arrange to send word to Pike. If Balon Greyjoy is acting out again, my father can pressure him. We might threaten to bring the royal fleet around the continent if he continues. That might give him pause." Robb suppressed a bitter smile. The idea of placing his trust in Lannister fleets to protect his homeland set his teeth on edge. Yet, ironically, that was precisely the alliance he had consented to. "We'll see," he said at last. I'll write to the lords of the northern coast, instruct them to be vigilant, and I'll send a request to King's Landing for additional ships if the threat grows. But we cannot be certain Tywin will deploy them for anything less than a major invasion. The Lannisters are notoriously frugal when it comes to resources. Cersei's eyes flashed. My father invests where it is to his benefit. If he believes the Ironborn might disrupt the realm's trade, he'll act. In the end, coin is a powerful motivator. He set the scroll aside. Very well, I'll do my part. Will you send Tyrion a response? She nodded. Of course. I'll tell him we're making arrangements to strengthen ties with the Riverlands and the North, that you remain a loyal ally. And I'll ask for any fresh tidings on the rest of the realm. As for these Targaryen rumors, I'll see what the Master of Whisperers says. If dragons are truly across the sea, that changes everything. Robb felt a faint stir of disbelief. The idea of a Targaryen queen with dragons sounded like a bard's tale. I won't concern myself with that just yet. We have more than enough to occupy us here. Their meeting ended, and Robb found himself stepping away from the high table, feeling that familiar tug of frustration. He remembered days when his decisions had been about leading men into battle, forging alliances with other northern houses, avenging his father's death. Now his days were filled with half measures of courtesy and careful posturing to keep a precarious peace intact. Yet he could not deny that fewer men were dying, fewer families torn apart. That alone had to be worth it. As he crossed the hall, he caught sight of Sansa near the entrance, exchanging a few words with a maidservant. She turned when she saw him, offering a tremulous smile. Though some color had returned to her cheeks, she still carried a fragility about her, a wariness born from her time in King's Landing. He beckoned her closer, wanting to see how she was faring. She curtsied, though he quickly waved off the formality. "Robb," she said, a soft warmth in her voice. "I was just looking for Mother. She promised me we could ride around the castle perimeter later this morning." He nodded, recalling how Sansa had once been more interested in embroidery and songs than riding. But captivity had changed her. She seemed both older and somehow subdued, lacking the carefree illusions that once sparkled in her eyes. "I'm glad to see you feeling better," he told her gently. "You've been through a great deal." She lowered her gaze. "It's easier now that I'm home, or at least away from King's Landing. Riverrun isn't Winterfell, but it's close to family. I feel safer. And for that, I thank you." He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I only wish I could have protected you from the start. But I'm glad you're safe now. I hope you'll never have to return to that city." A flicker of anxiety crossed her features, but she took a breath. "I still think about Arya. She's out there somewhere. Do we have any leads?" His heart twinged at the mention of their missing sister. "Not beyond rumors. Some say she was seen in the Riverlands. Others claim she was heading north. But there's been no proof. The war scattered many travelers. She might be hiding under a false name, or she might be, I don't know. But I haven't given up. None of us have." Sansa nodded, and for an instant, determination shone in her eyes. "She's strong, Arya. She'll find a way." They exchanged a few more words about day-to-day matters before she went in search of Catelyn. Robb lingered in the hall, lost in thought. The ghost of Arya haunted him as well, though he found scant energy to pursue her trail now that so many matters demanded his attention. The guilt gnawed at him. He wished he could spare a contingent of men to scour the countryside, but the war had left him with fewer resources, and the pressing need to maintain vigilance against the Ironborn or potential rebellions took precedence. With a heavy sigh, he reminded himself that Arya had always been resourceful. If any child of the Starks could survive alone in a war-torn land, it was her. He was about to head to the smithy again when a hush fell over the hall. Turning, he saw that Cersei had risen from her seat and was walking toward him, flanked by her guard. She gave him a faint nod of acknowledgement. "I'll write to Tyrion now. In a few hours, perhaps we can discuss the details of this hosting plan. I believe it would be wise to invite some of the Lords Paramount, those of the Vale if we can secure them. The Vale has been neutral, but it might benefit us to show them our goodwill. Robb folded his arms. The Vale still mourns Lord Arryn, and Lisa Arryn is notoriously difficult. She rarely leaves the Eyrie, and I doubt she'd come here for any social occasion. Cersei arched a brow. Then we'll see if she sends an envoy. Someone must speak for House Arryn. If not, we have other lords to consider. The Tullys, of course, though they're already in your mother's good graces. The Freys, the Mallisters, the Blackwoods, the Brackens. We might even consider the Reach, though the Tyrells remain watchful. The more lords we gather under your roof, the more we display stability. It all helps the realm's image. He gave a reluctant nod. The plan made sense even if it tasted like ashes. Do what you must, he said. I'll ensure the castle staff are prepared for however many guests you invite. With that, she swept away, the swirl of her burgundy gown trailing behind. Gray Wind let out a soft chuff, as though he too sensed the tension that clung to them. Robb reached down to ruffle the direwolf's ears. Come on, boy, he murmured. Let's see to the armory before I'm swarmed by more royal errands. He left the hall, descending the short steps to the courtyard, pushing aside the worries that loomed overhead. The clang of the smithy soon filled his ears, a reminder that steel and sweat still had their place in this uncertain peace. He greeted the blacksmith, a broad-shouldered man named Horace, who was hammering out the beginnings of a blade. Nearby, an apprentice fanned the coals, sparks flying with every gust. Horace paused his work to bow his head in respect. Lord, come to see if the new lot of spears meets your liking. Robb took one from the rack, inspected the steel tip, tested its balance. Well crafted, he remarked, though I'd like to see a few more edges sharpened for thrusting. Some of these men forget that a dull spear is little better than a club. Horace grunted. I'll see to it. Got a new shipment of iron last week. Should be plenty for repairing the rest of the arms. Robb nodded, setting the spear aside. For a time, he discussed the logistics of outfitting new recruits and replacing battered armor. It was almost a comfort to focus on the tangible tasks of forging and armoring rather than the slippery domain of politics. Yet inevitably, the conversation circled back. Horace mentioned rumors from the traveling caravans, talk of dark omens in the east, of dragons, of a queen who had freed slaves and was amassing an army. Robb pretended nonchalance, though inwardly he filed the information away. If the rumors were even half true, the realm might face a threat far greater than the bickering of lords. By midday, the sun stood high, and Robb retreated from the smithy to wash and take a brief meal. He ate sparingly in a small alcove off the main hall, joined by Edmure Tully, who had arrived from a morning ride inspecting the outskirts of the castle's lands. Edmure looked more confident these days, having weathered the storms of war. Yet he still carried the memory of being taken captive by the Freys and the Lannisters. He greeted Robb with familiarity, calling him nephew with a touch of pride. The small folk seem relieved, Edmure said over a cup of ale. Some are even beginning to rebuild old watermills that were burnt down. It's strange to see so many returning to the fields as if the war were just a bad dream. Robb managed a thin smile. Let them keep that illusion as long as possible. The Riverlands need every harvest they can manage. I still remember the scorched farms we passed during campaigns. The war's scars will linger. Edmure nodded gravely. True enough. But at least there are few new battles. Perhaps in time the land will forget. Robb was not so sure the land would ever forget, but he offered no argument. As they finished their food, one of Cersei's handmaidens approached, letting him know the queen awaited him in the solar for discussion. With a sigh, he rose, gave Edmure a brief wave, and headed up the winding stairs. He found Cersei seated by the window where a beam of afternoon light made her hair gleam like pale gold. Several parchment scrolls lay spread on a small table. She looked up when he entered, gesturing for him to sit. I've been drafting invitations, she said without preamble. Some addressed to the local lords, others to the Vale, the Westerlands, and the Crownlands. One to Lord Tyrell in Highgarden, though I doubt he'll come. We can at least make the gesture. Robb settled on a wooden chair across from her. I'll have to expand the lodging arrangements if many of them accept. Riverrun wasn't built for grand courts. Still, we can manage if we plan well enough. She nodded, scanning her lists. We'll need entertainment, feasts, perhaps a small tourney on the green near the castle, just enough to display skill without looking like a challenge to the Iron Throne. And it would be wise for us to appear united. The notion of a Northerner king married to a Lannister queen still intrigues many. They'll be watching our every gesture. He resisted the urge to grimace, instead keeping his tone neutral. Fine. I'll speak with the castle steward about preparations. Let me see the list. She passed the parchment to him. He read the names, some of them stirring old resentment. Lords who had once declared for the Lannisters in the war or who had marched under the banner that led to Ned Stark's imprisonment. Yet they were now potential guests in his hall. The thought made his stomach knot. Still, he saw the sense in it. No realm could mend if old wounds were never addressed. And if it meant fewer swords drawn in the future, perhaps it was worth the bitterness. They spent the afternoon finalizing details, how many days the gathering might last, what events could be held, which knights would be invited to compete in the small tourney. Cersei had a keen grasp of social maneuvering. She suggested awarding symbolic prizes, small gold lion statuettes or silver dire wolves to highlight the new bond between their houses. Robb considered the idea borderline distasteful, but he saw the advantage. Symbols had power. A show of generosity, a sense of shared heraldry might soothe uneasy lords. As the sun dipped low, they broke off the planning session. Robb felt a headache forming behind his eyes. I never thought I'd become a glorified courtier, he muttered, massaging his temples. I was meant to be a soldier. Cersei gave a short laugh. War is merely one face of power. Politics is another. You'll learn to wield both or be devoured by those who can. He glanced at her, seeing that gleam of cunning in her gaze. In those moments, he remembered exactly who she was, a woman shaped by the intrigues of King's Landing, skilled at manipulation and survival. Their marriage might be a partnership of sorts, but it was also a chain binding them both. He couldn't forget that. That night, the castle was quiet, the corridors lit by flickering torches. Robb tried to sleep, but his mind whirled with lists of invited lords and the potential challenges each might bring. At last, he rose, threw on a cloak, and slipped out. He wandered the dim halls until he reached the courtyard. The moon was high, casting the stones in a silvery sheen. Grey wind lay curled near the stables, and he lifted his head at Robb's approach, tail thumping once. Robb knelt beside the dire wolf, letting the night air cool his thoughts. He found himself thinking of High as father again. Ned Stark had never been the type to relish court politics. He had endured them for the sake of duty. Now Robb was following a similar path, but with far sharper edges. Perhaps it was always Ned's fate to be outmaneuvered in King's Landing, while Robb had avoided the same fate by forging an unholy alliance. He closed his eyes, exhaling a cloud of breath into the chilly air. A whisper of motion drew his attention. Opening his eyes, he saw a slim figure emerge from the shadows. It was Sansa, wrapped in a dark cloak. She started when she realized he was there. "Robb," she said softly. "I thought you were asleep." He rose, beckoning her closer. "Couldn't find sleep. What brings you out so late?" She hesitated, then said, "I had a dream about King's Landing. I awoke feeling trapped. Sometimes I need to remind myself I'm free. Walking helps." He understood. "You're free here," he assured her gently. "No one will harm you." She gave a timid nod. "I know, but sometimes the memory of that place creeps up on me in the dark." She lowered her gaze. "I also can't stop thinking about Joffrey. I know he's lost his throne, but does that make me safe forever? Will I never be forced to see him again?" Robb's jaw tightened. Tywin Lannister keeps him locked away, but that doesn't mean he won't try to influence events or find a way back to power. For now, though, you are safe from him. That I promise." She swallowed hard. He liked to pretend he was so powerful, but in truth, he was just a cruel boy. I'd almost pity him if he hadn't. She broke off, shuddering. Robb set a hand on her shoulder. "He's far behind us," he said softly. "You have all of us now, Mother, Edmure, me. You won't have to face him again unless you choose." She managed a shaky smile. "Thank you, Robb." They stood there under the moonlight for a little while, talking quietly of Winterfell, of simpler times. Sansa recalled the day their father had found a litter of direwolf pups in the snow. How excited Arya had been to have her own. How frightened Sansa had been by the notion of a wolf inside the castle. Robb listened, the memory bittersweet. He thought of how far they'd traveled from that moment, how many changes had come crashing over them. At last, Sansa excused herself to return to her bed, and Robb lingered with Grey Wind a while longer. In the morning, the real work began. Messages were sent out by Raven, invitations penned, sealed with both the dire wolf of House Stark and the lion of House Lannister. Robb spent hours with the stewards, charting how best to accommodate a potential influx of guests. The courtyard would need to be cleared of certain wagons, the stables expanded, the storehouses inventoried for food. There was talk of bringing in extra huntsmen to stock up on game if the feast days ran long. Cersei dispatched her own letters to King's Landing, ensuring that Tyrion could coordinate any crown officials who might attend. The entire castle buzzed with anticipation, though an undercurrent of tension ran beneath the surface. Not everyone was pleased at the notion of welcoming Lannister allies with open arms. More than a few in the Tully ranks muttered about false courtesies. But Robb pressed on. Over the next 2 weeks, replies trickled back. Some houses accepted, eager to witness firsthand the new power dynamic or curry favor with both Stark and Lannister. Others declined, citing distance or winter concerns. A few, like the Arryns, remained silent, all of which was expected. By the time the first guests started to arrive, Riverrun's corridors were bustling with servants carrying crates, barrels, fine linens, and newly crafted banners to be hung from the walls. The gates were flung wide to receive lords in carriages or on horseback, knights in shining mail, and their retinues of pages, guards, and minstrels. Tents sprang up outside the castle for overflow lodging. Robb was forced to greet each new arrival with polite smiles and gracious words, even those whose presence stoked old animosities in his chest. Cersei proved deft at social management, welcoming visitors in a grand receiving line. Clad in a crimson gown with gold embroidery, she radiated confidence. She exchanged pleasantries, deflected pointed questions about King's Landing, and flattered lesser lords who might otherwise have felt slighted. Robb stood by her side, wearing fine attire of gray and silver to represent House Stark, speaking when required. He found it exhausting, but it was necessary to maintain the veneer of harmony. More than once, he spied a guest eyeing him with thinly veiled skepticism or resentment, but with Cersei present and Lannister guards on display, none dared voice outright hostility. When the day's reception ended, Robb escaped to the privacy of his solar, letting the steward know he wished to dine in relative quiet. Cersei, however, was nowhere to be seen, presumably continuing to mingle or retire to her own chambers. As Robb settled into a chair, he massaged his temple, thinking how the circus would likely last for days, culminating in the small tourney. On one level, he was grateful to see men compete with blunted lances instead of crossing real swords. On another, he braced himself for the possibility that old grudges might flare up even in the midst of staged chivalry. His solitude was short-lived. Lady Catelyn soon arrived, accompanied by Edmure and a few Tully bannermen. They carried a sheaf of parchment listing the final tally of expected knights for the tournament. Robb groaned quietly at the numbers. Over 50 knights had entered or were planning to. Accommodating them all would be a chore. Still, he saw some potential in it. With so many pairs of eyes watching, the realm might see that the new alliance was genuine. That night, Riverrun was alight with torches, laughter, and the music of minstrels drifting from corners of the great hall. Robb made an appearance at the feast, wearing a measured smile. He sat at the high table with Cersei, who regaled the guests with tales of the capital's recent festivities for Tommen's coronation. Some lords asked about Joffrey, feigning polite curiosity. Cersei dismissed those questions with a graceful flick of her hand. "He's in seclusion, receiving the care he needs," she said in a tone that brooked no further inquiry. Robb could sense a ripple of unease among the guests, but no one dared push. Instead, they turned to discussing minor matters, their journeys, the conditions of the roads, the sumptuous food. Platters of roasted duck, spiced onions, honey carrots, and fresh bread lined the tables. Wine flowed freely. People grew warm and talkative, though the specter of war still hovered like a distant memory. Partway through the meal, Robb excused himself to circulate, exchanging greetings with notable lords. He spotted a cluster of river lords, Mallister, Bracken, and Blackwood, seated close together. A surprising sign of unity, given that the Brackens and Blackwoods had feuded for generations. He drifted toward them, offering a nod of acknowledgement. "My lords, I trust Riverrun is treating you kindly?" They rose briefly in respect. Lord Mallister, a man of tall stature with the eagle sigil on his doublet, offered a courtesy. "Indeed, your grace. We are pleased to see the castle so lively again. The war's gloom weighed on our hearts too long." Lord Bracken, thickset and grim, grunted his agreement. "War is costly. I lost too many good men, and I'm weary of seeing farmland trampled. If a feast can keep the swords sheathed, I'm all for it." Lord Blackwood, slender and sharp-eyed, gave a curt bow. "We come in good faith, my lord." though we remain watchful. Our lands have their own troubles. But if this gathering fosters peace, we'll not stand in its way. Robb thanked them, making a point to praise each for the steps they'd taken in rebuilding their domains. Though he detected an undercurrent of wariness, especially regarding the presence of Lannisters, none openly challenged him. This was progress. He moved on, exchanging pleasantries with others. He passed by a group of Crownlands knights in conversation with a few Westerlanders wearing lion-crested cloaks, all apparently praising the day's hunt. Despite the complexities swirling beneath, at least on the surface, men were talking instead of fighting. Eventually, he found Sansa again, seated beside their mother. She looked flushed from the heat of so many bodies in the hall, but a soft smile graced her features as she listened to a bard's gentle tune. Robb approached, and she looked up at him. "It's wonderful to hear music that isn't some Lannister victory song," she said quietly. "They've been playing ballads of old heroes, too." I like it." He nodded, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Enjoy the evening. Tomorrow will bring more pageantry. Then the tourney where knights will break lances for some token of favor. Perhaps you'll give one your favor." She blushed faintly at the thought. "I don't think I'm ready for that. Besides, I'm not sure if it's safe to draw attention." Catelyn overheard, letting out a gentle chuckle. "A token of favor is tradition, Sansa, not a betrothal. But no one will press you if you prefer to remain quietly in the stands. In time, you'll feel freer." Sansa lowered her gaze. "We'll see." Robb offered a reassuring smile and moved on. Before long, he returned to his seat at the high table. Cersei was in the midst of a conversation with Lord Brax from the Westerlands, a silver-haired man with a bristling mustache who politely asked about the Ironborn situation. Cersei deferred to Robb, prompting him to summarize the steps being taken to secure the northern coasts. Robb explained the watchtowers along the shore and the possibility of Lannister ships patrolling if Balon Greyjoy grew too bold. Lord Brax nodded, satisfied that the new alliance was indeed functioning in practical ways. By the end of the feast, many guests retired to bed with full bellies and the sense that this event might truly be the dawn of a more stable realm. Morning brought the pageantry of the tourney's first day. The lower bailey had been cleared and ringed with wooden stands for spectators. Bright banners snapped in the wind, both the Direwolf of Stark and the Lion of Lannister displayed prominently alongside the Fish of Tully. Dozens of other sigils fluttered as well, marking the seats of respective houses. Robb arrived with Cersei on his arm, clad in a simpler outfit of gray breeches and a black doublet, the Direwolf insignia on his chest. She wore a sleek outfit of deep red, trimmed with gold. Trumpets sounded their arrival, and the assembled crowd cheered politely, though the sound was more measured than enthusiastic. The memory of war had not faded entirely, and many lords and ladies watched with carefully composed faces, unsure of what drama might unfold. Robb took his seat in the high box, Cersei beside him, Lady Catelyn and Sansa on his other side. Below, knights milled about in the lists, adjusting armor, comparing lances, sizing up competitors. The jousting would begin soon. Robb spotted men from the Crownlands, the Westerlands, even a handful from the Stormlands who had come as spectators and ended up entering. A few Riverland knights were there, representing houses large and small, eager to test their skill in front of so many lords. The chatter of the stands blended with the snorting of horses, the clank of armor, the rustle of capes. The herald stepped forward, a tall man with a booming voice. He welcomed all to the tourney, declared it an event to celebrate the enduring peace of the realm, praising His Grace Robb Stark, Warden of the North, and Her Grace Cersei Lannister, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. The titles still felt strange on Robb's ears, and the tension in the crowd told him it felt strange to them too. But the applause was polite, if not raucous. Then the jousting began. Riders thundered down the lists, lances shattering on shields and breastplates. Some knights were unhorsed, landing heavily in the dirt. A few collisions drew gasps from the crowd as splinters flew. Between rounds, squires rushed in to help the fallen and present fresh lances. Robb found himself caught up in the spectacle, grateful for a respite from the political complexities. He cheered a few impressive hits, clapped politely when a knight toppled his opponent in an elegant pass. The crowd's mood warmed as the contests proceeded without scandal. After a time, the day's initial matches ended. The crowd dispersed for a midday meal and the knights readied themselves for another round in the afternoon. Robb stood, helping Cersei step down from the box. She leaned in, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Better than I expected," she remarked. "No fights in the stands, no accusations of cheating yet." He gave a short laugh. "Perhaps we can actually pull off a peaceful event." They made their way toward a pavilion set up for honored guests, where tables groaned under platters of bread, cheese, roasted meats, and fruit. Servants poured wine into cups. Lord Mallister, Lord Brax, Lady Mouton, and several others were already mingling beneath the striped canopy. Cersei glided among them with a poised smile, exchanging pleasantries. Robb gravitated to a corner where a serving girl offered him a cup of mead. He sipped slowly, scanning the crowd. Each interaction was a dance, alliances forming or dissolving with a careless word or a pointed glance. He felt a tug at his sleeve. Turning, he saw Roose Bolton. The pale-eyed lord bowed his head in a gesture of respect. "Your Grace," Bolton said quietly. "A word, if I may?" Robb stiffened, recalling the unease he'd always felt around Bolton. The man had served him during the war, though rumors spoke of unsettling behavior. Still, Bolton had proven indispensable in recapturing parts of the north from the Ironborn. Robb nodded, stepping aside. "What is it, my lord?" Bolton's voice was as subdued as ever. "I've received word that my men in the Drevfort region have noticed renewed Greyjoy longships along the coast, possibly scouting. They have not made a move inland yet, but they are present in greater numbers than before." Robb's gut tightened. Balon Greyjoy testing our vigilance again. "Have they attacked any villages?" Bolton shook his head. "Not that we know of. But it's a matter of time if they grow bolder. The west coast was hardest hit when we last faced them. I've sent men to watch for signs of landing parties. If they do appear, we'll be ready." Robb nodded curtly, his mind racing. "Thank you for telling me. Do not engage unless you must. I'll coordinate with you if we need to send a larger force. For now, I'll inform the Lannisters. If we can muster a show of naval strength, maybe that will make the Ironborn think twice." Bolton's lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile. "A wise plan. War is best avoided unless it's on your terms." With that, Bolton slipped away, leaving Robb uneasy. He hated dealing with him, yet the man remained a vassal of the North, one who commanded considerable forces. Worse, his cunning nature made Robb uncertain of his loyalty. But for the moment, there was no direct hostility. Only that flicker of possibility that the Ironborn might spark another conflict. Resolved to keep the news quiet until the tourney ended, he didn't want panic overshadowing the gathering. Robb slid back among the guests, feigning normalcy. As the afternoon matches began, so did the hush of excited anticipation. The stands filled again, the crowd eager to see who would rise victorious. Lances clashed, horses churned the ground, and the wind carried the cheers of onlookers. Robb found himself leaning forward in his seat at times, gripping the edge of the box rail whenever a skilled knight seemed poised to deliver a decisive blow. Sansa watched wide-eyed, hands clasped in her lap, while Lady Catelyn murmured to her about the different shields and sigils. Cersei sat with regal poise, occasionally commenting on a technique or praising a particularly skillful pass. The realm's differences, it seemed, were momentarily drowned out by the thunder of hooves and the shimmer of plate. That evening, the victor of the day's rounds, a Crownlands knight by the name of Ser Miles Harrow, was presented to Robb and Cersei. He knelt, removing his helm, dark hair clinging to his forehead. He humbly thanked them for hosting the tourney and dedicated his performance to the unity of houses Stark and Lannister. Robb rewarded him with a small silver direwolf token, while Cersei pinned a golden lion brooch to his cloak. The crowd applauded, and many cast envious glances Ser Miles's way. The day ended on a high note, with the atmosphere in the castle one of cautious optimism. Yet as night fell, Robb's mind returned to Bolton's warning. After the feast, he slipped away to meet with Lady Catelyn, Edmure, and a few key advisors in a small solar. He shared the news of the Ironborn sightings. Catelyn's face darkened. "I feared they might not stay quiet forever. Balon Greyjoy has always sought independence, same as his people." Edmure raked a hand through his hair. "We're not prepared for a new war, especially along the coasts. The Riverlands don't have a fleet. If they strike deeper, it could cause chaos." Robb tapped his fingers on the table. "I'll write to Tywin, request the support of the royal fleet. Perhaps we can position some ships near the western shore. I'll also dispatch some of our men from the Neck to keep an eye out for any incursions. Bolton's men in the Dreadfort region may be the first line of warning. I'm reluctant to rely on Bolton, but we have no choice." Catelyn placed a calming hand on Robb's forearm. "Let's handle this quietly. We don't want to alarm the guests or disrupt the peace we've worked so hard to maintain. But be certain you have contingencies." He met her gaze. "I will. Tomorrow, after the final rounds of the tourney, I'll call a small council with Cersei. If she's wise, she'll see that containing the Ironborn is as much in Lannister interest as ours. She might be able to sway Tywin to act quickly." They agreed on that course. The meeting ended and the party dispersed, each bearing a shadow of worry. Robb lingered in the solar for a moment, alone in the flickering candlelight. He remembered the day he had marched from Winterfell at the start of the war, so certain of victory and justice. Now he lived in a realm perched on a knife's edge, forging alliances with his father's enemies to avert further catastrophe. Perhaps that was the cost of leadership, he thought, to sacrifice black and white ideals for the muddy realm of compromise. The second and final day of the tourney arrived with bright sunshine. Trumpets echoed through Riverrun as the last competitors took to the field. The stands were even fuller as common folk had gathered around the edges, hoping to glimpse the spectacle. Robb and Cersei again presided. This time, some knights wore ribbons or scarves from ladies who had granted them favors. Robb noticed with mild amusement that Sansa had indeed passed a small ribbon to one of the Riverland knights. It was a shy gesture, but a sign that she was finding a bit of confidence again. He felt a swell of brotherly relief. The justs were hard-fought. A Westerland's knight unhorsed Ser Miles, the previous day's winner, prompting cheers from some in the stands. In the final tilt, two Crownlands knights faced off in a nail-biting pass of shattered lances, each nearly unseating the other. Ultimately, Ser Daemon Craighall emerged triumphant, earning the day's champion title. Robb and Cersei honored him with a small purse of gold and the ceremonial direwolf lion medal. Lion that had been crafted specifically for the victor. Ser Daemon bowed low, proclaiming loyalty to the union of wolf and lion. As the crowd dispersed, talk of a feast and dancing filled the air. Robb's obligations tugged at him. He wanted to slip away and address the Ironborn threat. Yet appearances demanded he remain visible. So he forced a smile and attended the celebratory banquet that followed, shaking hands and offering compliments. He drank sparingly, ate little, mindful of the urgent matter awaiting him. At last, when the initial excitement waned, he excused himself, calling a small council meeting in one of Riverrun's more private chambers. Cersei arrived promptly, accompanied by 2 Lannister guards and a scowling Pycelle who had come from King's Landing as a sort of royal advisor. Lady Catelyn was there, as was Edmure, Roose Bolton, who had arrived in the courtyard that morning, and a few select Northern and Riverland lords. They gathered around a table strewn with maps of the coast and the river routes. Robb explained the reports from the Dreadfort region and the sightings of Ironborn ships. He emphasized the need for swift action, quietly but decisively. Cersei listened, her expression thoughtful. "I'll write to my father," she said. "He can command the royal fleet to sail north if this becomes a clear threat. But Tywin will want evidence that Balon Greyjoy truly intends to break the peace. He won't waste ships lightly." Roose Bolton spoke in his eerily calm tone. "We have limited evidence, but the Ironborn are not known for polite visits. My men have seen them near the coast, more numerous than before. That should be enough to raise concern." Edmure nodded agreement. "Precisely. A show of force might deter them from landing. If we wait, they might raid the shores again, which could spark panic in the local lords. Then the realm will clamor for retaliation and we'll be plunged into bloodshed again." Pycelle coughed into his sleeve. "Ahem, the cost of dispatching the fleet is not small, my lords. We must weigh it carefully. But if the king in the north so requests..." Bolton interrupted. "He is not merely the king in the north, but the warden under the Iron Throne. The crown is responsible for aiding the wardens in defending their territory. Or have the laws changed?" Pycelle frowned, clearly annoyed at being corrected. No, of course not, my lord. I merely state that the crown must see to the entire realm's needs." Cersei lifted a hand, silencing the exchange. "The decision rests with my father. I'll send a raven immediately, urging him to dispatch at least a portion of the fleet to the western coasts. In the meantime, your men," she said, glancing at Robb, "should patrol the key points on shore. We'll coordinate so that when the ships arrive, they can link up effectively." Robb inclined his head, relieved. "Thank you. The North will do its part on land. We only ask that the crown uphold its role at sea." Cersei rose, smoothing the folds of her gown. "Very well. This matter is settled for now. Let us hope the Ironborn are merely posturing. We have enough trouble without a new war." She glanced at Bolton. "Keep me informed of any fresh reports." Bolton bowed silently. Pycelle fretted with his chain of office, then followed Cersei as she swept out of the chamber, leaving Robb, Catelyn, Edmure, and Bolton alone. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the tension thick. Finally, Bolton inclined his head toward Robb. "I'll return to my men soon and ensure vigilance. Do let me know if you receive any direct word from Tywin." Robb nodded, forcing courtesy. "Safe travels back to the Dreadfort, my lord." When Bolton had gone, Edmure let out a quiet sigh of relief. "I'd almost forgotten how unsettling he can be." Catelyn pursed her lips. "We'll need his cooperation if the Ironborn truly attack. In times like these, old misgivings must be put aside." Robb agreed. We have no choice. So far, at least, he's done his duty. Let's hope it stays that way. They parted, each with tasks to oversee. Rob lingered behind a moment, staring at the map. The lines along the coast felt like open wounds waiting to be struck. He recalled the devastation the Ironborn had caused, how Theon Greyjoy's betrayal had haunted Winterfell. That was a memory still raw, but Theon's fate was uncertain. Last Rob had heard, Theon had become a prisoner of House Bolton, though details were scarce. Shaking the thought aside, Rob left the solar and headed for the courtyard, needing fresh air. The next few days of festivities went smoothly. Guests lingered, indulging in feasts and hawking parties. A few petty squabbles arose, some knight insulted another's lineage, a drunken argument flared over which region's women were fairer, but no real violence erupted. Cersei deftly smoothed over conflicts where she could, employing her sharp tongue or veiled threats to quell trouble. Rob maintained a steady presence, presenting an image of calm leadership. Sansa, to his mild surprise, found a place among the visiting ladies, even laughing quietly at some jests. It was a relief to see her reclaiming a small measure of her old spirit. Finally, as the novelty wore off, guests began to depart. Carriages rolled out of Riverrun's gate, pennants fluttering in farewell. Rob bid them good journey with polite farewells, exchanging hollow promises of future visits. Each departure left the courtyard a little quieter until at last, only a few stragglers remained. Cersei declared the gathering a success, and from a certain angle, Rob supposed she was right. No blood had been spilled, no open feuds reignited, and the realm had seen a demonstration of unity between Stark and Lannister. For the moment, that was enough to please Tywin, who sent a terse letter acknowledging the event's success. He also confirmed, in a postscript, that the royal fleet would move northward if necessary, once the extent of the Ironborn threat was verified. With the castle returning to its usual rhythms, Rob found himself exhausted by the weeks of constant social maneuvering. He wanted nothing more than to ride out into the countryside for a few days of solitude. Yet obligations remained. Letters needed to be written, new orders issued for the men along the coast, and routine governance required his attention. Cersei also showed no inclination to leave Riverrun yet, which meant Rob had to maintain a level of hospitality. Now that the feast was over, the atmosphere between them shifted back to a cool politeness. Their private conversations were civil but distant. Each recognized the other's value in sustaining the alliance, but warmth was scarce. One evening, Rob sat alone in his solar, staring at the fireplace where embers glowed. He felt gray wind at his feet, a comforting presence. A soft knock sounded at the door. Expecting a steward or guard, Rob called for them to enter. To his surprise, it was Cersei, dressed in a velvet robe, her hair unbound around her shoulders. She looked at him with an odd expression, neither mocking nor imperious. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. He gestured for her to do so. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and moved closer to the fire. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she turned to face him. "It's quieter now that the guests are gone." He nodded. "Yes, quieter is welcome." She studied him. "You did well, you know. Hosting a gathering of so many different lords isn't easy, especially given the history between them. You handled it with more grace than I expected." He bristled slightly at the faint condescension but decided not to rise to it. "Thank you," he said simply. "And you managed the politics just as well." They stood in silence, the fire crackling softly. Rob could feel the weight of her gaze. Then she said, "It's strange to think how different our lives might have been. How many turns brought us here." He frowned. "Regrets." A flicker crossed her features. "I regret many things, but dwelling on them does no good. I came here because I realized we seldom speak without an audience. Everything has been about appearances, alliances, politics. I wonder if we can at least speak plainly, once in a while." He studied her, unsure if this was a trap or a genuine moment. "All right, then speak plainly." She drew in a breath. "When my father first proposed this match, I was furious. I blamed you, your father, the North, for so many of my misfortunes. Then I realized Tywin would go through with it no matter how I felt. So I thought I'd bend it to my advantage, keep you at arm's length while securing my position. But over these months, I've seen another side. You genuinely care for your people. You want to keep them safe, to honor your father's memory. That's more than I can say for many lords who've crossed my path. Robb listened, an odd sensation stirring inside him. He remembered how she'd confronted him on their wedding night, telling him never to show weakness. Now she sounded almost reflective. I do care for them, he said quietly. That's why I agreed to this marriage in the first place. To end a war that was devouring the North. She inclined her head. I know. And perhaps that sense of duty is something we share in our own ways. I want to keep my children safe, ensure they have power and security. You want to protect your homeland. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the fire. I don't expect us to become friends, nor do I believe we'll ever truly trust each other. But maybe we can move beyond mere tolerance. Robb found himself at a loss for words. It was a rare admission of vulnerability from her. He cleared his throat. What exactly do you propose? She gave a small shrug, the slightest hint of a wry smile. Perhaps we could speak like this more often. Decide what we want to build instead of just what we want to avoid. The realm is large, and you and I together wield considerable influence. If we can shape it to our benefit, well, that might be better than letting Tywin control every piece of the board. He was quiet for a moment, turning the idea over in his mind. You're suggesting we collaborate more actively? She nodded. Precisely. Tywin is not immortal. When he's gone, who holds the reins? If we cultivate alliances of our own, gather loyal supporters, we won't be at the mercy of someone like Tyrion or any other competitor. We can ensure the North's interests and my children's security without constantly bending to Tywin's will. A swirl of conflicting emotions welled up in Robb. He still despised much of what the Lannisters had done, yet Cersei's logic was undeniable. Eventually, Tywin would pass on, and the realm would scramble to fill the power vacuum. If Robb and Cersei were unprepared, the entire alliance might collapse. You speak of planning for a future that may be years away, he said carefully. She let out a low laugh. Planning for tomorrow is how one survives in King's Landing. He couldn't argue that. He shifted his stance, arms folded. I'll consider it. But you must understand I'll never betray the North's interests. If our goals ever clash. She lifted a hand. I expect nothing less. But if you trust me enough to talk strategy, we might avoid those clashes. Or at least mitigate them. Her gaze lingered on him. Think about it. She turned to go, then hesitated at the door. Her voice softened. Good night, Robb. He nodded. Good night. When the door closed behind her, he stared at the dying embers in the hearth for a long time, mind churning. Cersei's proposition was surprising, though he supposed he shouldn't be shocked. She was always looking for an angle, a way to secure power on her own terms. The difference now was that she seemed to view him as an ally rather than a pawn. If he were wise, he might leverage that for the North's benefit, ensuring that when Tywin's iron grip loosened, the North would not be at the whim of manipulative courtiers in King's Landing. But trusting Cersei was another matter. He couldn't banish the memory of her cruelty, her role in Ned Stark's downfall, the cunning she had honed over years at court. Still, this was the reality he had chosen by accepting the marriage. If forging a deeper political partnership with her meant safeguarding his people, maybe it was worth the risk. War had taught him that illusions of purity rarely endured. He had to live in the world as it was, not as he wished it to be. Over the following days, life at Riverrun settled into an odd semblance of routine. Messages flowed back and forth between the castle and King's Landing, between the castle and the North. Reports came in that the Ironborn ships remained near the coastline, though no raids had been confirmed yet. Tywin signaled that a detachment of the royal fleet was prepared if needed. The lords of the Riverlands resumed their tasks, and the repairs around the region continued. Slowly, the scars of war faded beneath new harvests, new ventures. Robb took heart in seeing farmland tilled and families returning to homesteads once abandoned. Cersei remained, presumably waiting on further instructions from Tywin. In that time, she and Robb conversed more often, sometimes in the library or on the battlements. They never spoke of love or affection, there was no point in pretense, but they did exchange views on the realm's governance. Cersei explained the complexities of dealing with the royal court, the hidden alliances among lesser houses. Robb shared his perspective on the Northern Bannermen, the fierce loyalty that had once bound them, and the challenges of rebuilding trust after so many had died. Out of these conversations emerged a cautious respect, each recognizing the other's intelligence and drive. Yet the alliance remained fraught with tension. One afternoon, Robb found himself overseeing the questioning of a group of bandits caught on the outskirts of the Tully lands. They'd been raiding small farmsteads claiming to be Lannister men. The locals had nearly strung them up, believing the crown had reneged on its peace. Under interrogation, the bandits confessed they were simply opportunists, using the Lannister name to instill fear. Robb had them locked away, intending to mete out justice. But Cersei, hearing of it, insisted on witnessing their punishment, perhaps to demonstrate that the crown did not condone such crimes. The tension in her expression as she faced men who used her house's name for terror was palpable, and it reminded Robb that their alliance was never more than a hair's breadth from violence. He wondered if she, too, felt that precariousness, if she saw how easily illusions could crumble. When evening came, he walked the castle walls, gray wind padding beside him. Clouds gathered in the sky, heralding a coming storm. He paused at a crenellation, gazing out at the Red Fork's waters, which reflected the bruised purple of the sky. In the distance, lightning flickered. He closed his eyes, letting the wind whip at his hair. He could almost smell the tang of winter behind that storm, a reminder that while the realm bickered over power, the seasons marched on inexorably. He recalled distant rumors from the far north, strange sightings, talk of whites and white walkers. But no one south of the neck paid heed. Even in the midst of so much turmoil, few believed in ancient legends. Sometimes Robb wondered if that was yet another storm gathering on the horizon, one the realm was utterly unprepared for. But he couldn't fight phantoms. He had more immediate battles, keeping the North safe, maintaining the fragile truce, balancing Cersei's overtures of partnership against the memory of father's blood on Lannister blades. A single clap of thunder rumbled and fat droplets of rain began to fall. Grey wind let out a soft growl as if voicing his own unease. Robb gave a grim nod, turning away from the battlements. He headed inside as the storm broke in earnest, sheets of rain lashing the castle walls. On his way down the corridor, he nearly collided with a breathless messenger who bowed hastily, delivering a fresh scroll bearing Tywin's seal. Robb accepted it, the wax still glistening, untouched by the rain. He read it at once, ignoring the water dripping from his cloak. Tywin's words were direct, even brusque. Further intelligence suggests that Balon Greyjoy may be planning to harass merchant shipping from Lannisport to White Harbor. The royal fleet is ordered north to demonstrate force. You are expected to coordinate on land. Ensure Lady Cersei's safety. The realm cannot afford further instability. The letter ended with Tywin's customary flourish, a stark reminder that he remained the controlling hand behind Tommen's throne. Robb felt a wave of weary acceptance. So it began. Balon Greyjoy was making his move, or at least enough of a move to draw out the fleet. The realm would soon be at heightened alert. If the Ironborn raids turned serious, fighting could ignite along the coasts. He sighed, passing a hand across his brow. It never ends, he muttered. He dismissed the messenger, tucking the letter into his belt. Grey wind shook water from his fur. Robb patted the direwolf's head, then strode through the corridors, searching for Cersei. He found her in the great hall, conferring with one of her ladies. She turned, eyes flicking over his damp cloak, and arched an eyebrow. I have news, he said. From your father. Her expression hardened. Let's hear it. He handed her the scroll. She read quickly, her mouth tightening. So the fleet is on the move, she murmured. Tywin wants me to remain here under your watch, apparently. Robb nodded. That seems to be the implication. He doesn't want you in harm's way if Balon Greyjoy attempts anything drastic. And he wants me to coordinate the land defense. We'll have to muster men along the shores, perhaps fortify certain towns. If the Ironborn land in force, it could become a real conflict. Cersei's jaw set. Then let's ensure they don't. I'll draft instructions for some Lannister vassals in the Westerlands to bolster the coastline there. You secure your side. We can squeeze them from both directions. He felt a grudging appreciation for her decisiveness. Agreed. I'll call my lords to a war council. We'll plan accordingly. She handed the scroll back. At least your men have had time to recover from the last war, she said, a hint of irony in her tone. We'll see if Balon Greyjoy truly wants to tangle with a realm united. A realm united, Robb thought. It was a phrase that still rang hollow. Yet on paper, they were indeed a single power now. He left the hall to gather his council, the storm outside raging, the wind howling against the stone walls. A part of him couldn't help but feel that the realm itself was mirroring the chaos of the weather, swirling with dangerous undercurrents that could break into violence at any moment. He thought of all he had sacrificed, his father, his illusions of independence, his own sense of peace, and steeled himself once more. If driving back the Ironborn was the next step in preserving the fragile stability he'd fought so hard to achieve, then he would see it through. That night, thunder shook the castle and lightning lit the corridors in dazzling flashes. In the flickering brightness, Robb paced the confines of his room, reviewing maps of the coastline, scribbling notes for the war council. Grey wind dozed in the corner, occasionally lifting his head whenever thunder cracked too close. Outside, the windows rattled with gusts of wind. Robb tried to quell the relentless anxiety gnawing at him. Here he was, forging an alliance with his father's old enemy to fight yet another threat. How many more threats would come before the realm truly found peace? In a moment of introspection, he paused at the window, watching the sheets of rain batter the courtyard below. He remembered the boy he'd been, practicing swordplay in Winterfell's yard, dreaming of glory and honorable battles. The road he had traveled since then was strewn with blood and heartbreak, culminating in a marriage to the very queen who had once stood against his family. He wondered if, in years to come, this alliance would be seen as a masterstroke or a betrayal of everything House Stark stood for. Perhaps neither. Perhaps it would simply be another thread in the grand tapestry of the realm's turbulent history. He took a deep breath, letting the smell of rain wash over him. Tomorrow, he would gather his lords, hammer out a plan with Cersei, and dispatch riders to the northern coasts. The cycle of vigilance and compromise would continue. Still, in the midst of all that uncertainty, he took a shred of hope from one simple fact. The North, for now, stood safe, spared from the worst ravages of war, and his family, what remained of it, could breathe freely. If that was the price of binding himself to the Lannisters, he would pay it. Ned Stark's memory deserved a realm free of slaughter, if only for a time. Holding on to that thought like a talisman, Robb let the thunder fade into a distant rumble. He closed his eyes, determined to face whatever tempest loomed on the horizon, certain only of one truth: he would not fail his people no matter the cost.